Good afternoon and welcome everyone. A very warm welcome to the EMA's Managers Meetup Career Insights with Matthew Greer. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces here today. My name is Michelle Ronquillo and I am EMA's event manager. Just a little bit about us for those who are new. Within EMA, we bring together music managers organizations from 18 European countries, representing over 3,000 managers across Europe. Our mission is to strengthen European music managers globally, and we do this through Empower 2.0, our flagship program encompassing education, advocacy, networking, research, and international collaboration. Empower 2.0 is co-funded by the European Union and focuses on building a fairer, greener, more inclusive, and digitally resilient music ecosystem. If you'd like to learn more about Empower 2.0, I will drop the links in the chat in a little bit, and you can also explore at any time you wish our website, emma.community/empower with two M's. To stay connected with Emma, make sure to visit our website, follow us on social media, join our WhatsApp community, and sign up to our newsletter. All links in a little bit in the chat. At the end of the session, when you log off Zoom, a very short survey will pop up. We'd really appreciate if you could take a moment to fill it out. Your feedback generally helps us improve and shape future events. Today's Career Insights session is moderated by music manager and EMA Rock and Metal Steering Committee member, Nuria Castañé. Please remember to add your questions in the chat. We will have some time at the end of the session. And I think that's all from me. Thank you all so much for being here. And let's dive in. Nuria, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you so much, Edma, for give me this opportunity. I'm quite sure that it will be inspirational as the other one, but for me it's very special because we have a very a great reference of the industry here as a manager. And thank you all of you, and good afternoon. And Matt, it's impressive your career because I can think about how your work with, for example, Frank Carter and the Rattlesnakes, and then with the Hives. So let's start with the past, just when you started, and because I think it will help us to understand where are you now. So please give us some ideas on how you started, how you just become to be a manager.
Well, thanks everyone, and I'm excited to be here. It's my first panel in a while, so it's nice to get back on the circuit. Yeah, it's funny. I get asked this by people who don't work in the music industry, and they say, how did you get into that? Or like, what does a manager do? And it's sometimes hard to answer the question because it's as some of you will know, you can fall into it. I don't think that many kids wake up wake up thinking about their careers wanting to be a music manager. I think maybe it's more common now. There's more managers who are famous, Scooter Braun, people like that. I think the music manager as a job is more well known. But when I was younger, I had no idea what a music manager was. All I knew was that I loved music. I loved rock music. I grew up going to shows in London from when I was really young, sort of 12 or 13 years old, going to see Slipknot and hardcore bands, and the emo scene in London was getting really big at the time. I used to go to a lot of shows, and I started flyering for club nights to get in because I was underage. So some of the clubs would only let me in if I flyed for them outside, and so that was my kind of way in the door. And then when I was in university, me and some friends started to promote some club nights and some gigs, and we had no idea what we were doing. And I remember every time we'd have to email a manager or an agent, we'd freak out. We'd be like, oh my God, who are these people who are, they're these big, important, scary people. And, I think a lot of those people started off in the same way as we did, and slowly found myself booking shows. And then I got a job scouting for a company when I was in my early 20s, and then transitioned into management. And I realized that I actually was always, as a fan, I was thinking about the kind of 360 of it. I'd think oh, it's interesting that that band is touring there, or the artwork is interesting for that, or I like the way they did the marketing on that, or that's interesting who they chose as a producer. And actually, I was always thinking about some of those things that you do day to day in management. And so when I started working in the job, I really enjoyed it. I love the 360 element of it. I love the business side. I love the creative side. I love the relationships. I love the feeling when it goes well, when you're there at the show when it's sold out and you're there with the band and the buzz from that. And I think that, being at the center of it and the variety of the different things that you do, it keeps me on my toes. It keeps my ADHD brain moving. And, I kind of couldn't see myself doing anything else. So yeah, I sort of fell into it by accident, to be completely honest. And in the early stages, I remember managing a band from London called Liger, who sort of sounded like Muse meets Nirvana, and that was my first that was my first band, and they were booked by a guy called Steve Strange, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, and Steve and a guy called Josh Javor, and Josh now runs WME in London, and he now works with the Hives. So it's funny, 15 years later, I've come full circle working with someone who was there with me at the beginning, and that's when I really started to see behind the scenes. And I was working with the agent who did Eminem and Queens of the Stone Age and Coldplay and Snow Patrol and people like that. And I remember in the early stages, Steve would always pick up the phone to me, even though I was just this kid, and I think that maybe we'll get to this down the line, but that thing of finding mentors and people who can help shepherd you through and who will always pick up the phone and give you advice. um, I think that's really invaluable, and I try and do the same as well, because you never know where people end up down the line. And so, yeah, so I started managing this band, Liger. They had a bit of a buzz, but we could never really get a record deal signed, and it was a struggle. And so we parted ways. And then I discovered a band called Radkey, who were a punk band from Missouri. These three brothers, teenagers who played like Misfits style, Ramones style punk. And within like 2 months, we got them on Jules Holland, and they were the first punk band on Jules Holland since like At the Drive-In, like 10 years before. And I remember thinking, this is fun. Like maybe I can do this as a job. This kind of, this is working. Um, and worked with them for a number of years. And then at the time started working with Nick Cave as an assistant. I was a terrible assistant. I'll be honest. I think it's hard. I was sort of too scatterbrained, running around trying to book my own gigs and do all this kind of stuff. But I definitely learned how important it is to have that sort of on your team. And I think that at the time I was young and inexperienced, and it was a bit of a learning curve for me. And then after that, I started working with two bands from Canada, Half Moon Run and Metric, which was kind of more on the indie side. And I was able to learn a bit more about international touring and visas and grants and stuff like that. I think in Canada, they have a lot of grant applications and stuff like that. And so I was able to learn from that and apply that in the UK, because then at the same time in the UK, there was a lot of grant money available. So the skills that I learned from that, I was able to apply to Frank Carter, who was my next client. And we bootstrapped his business with grant money so that we didn't have to sign bad record deals. And we were able to retain his rights and get basically government subsidized money to kickstart his career, and do it in a way that was artist friendly. And so yeah, it's funny the sort of the way it all intertwines, and the skills you learn 1 year, you might then apply 5 years later. And I think that that's been a really interesting thing in the job of the different twists and turns, and sometimes the things that go wrong many years later actually lead to something that goes right, and you never really know when that is. But it's a fascinating job. So
Yeah.
uh,
Thank you.
yeah. And then after Frank Carter, I started managing the Hives, and that's where I am.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it's a very long experience, but it's not so long in years or in time. But in any case, as you already mentioned, we as a manager, we have to have somehow a 360 vision, or we have to look around all the time. It's so different right now than when you started on in your, well, the first years of your career. Is the world, the industry, the music industry changed so much? And if I guess it's so, and in which sense, what are the main changes right now that you are challenging that it was not, you not think about it some years ago?
Well, I think when I started, for sure, I remember like one really specific thing was A&R and finding new artists. When I started scouting and at the start of when I started managing, you still had to go to shows all the time. And you still do, but back then it was really like, artists would be playing these gigs undiscovered, and then all of a sudden something would get hot and everyone would go to the show, and you'd be at like, some pub in Camden, and you'd have half the music industry there. And that would be like twice or three times a week. And now it's different. I think finding talent, the talent blows up. You can put a track online and it goes, and immediately that artist has a manager, an agent, a label. And so I think that much harder to it's much harder to find new talent that's really good. And I think artists aren't given the time to develop. 10, 15 years ago, a band could sit and play and plug away undiscovered for a while to get good before they get the industry moment. And now I think some artists have the hype before they're ready. And then actually, I think that's bad for them because, it takes a long time for artists to get good. And I think that it definitely leads to artists having hype, which then dissipates and is bad for their career long term. It's, yeah, that's been an interesting thing to see. I think also just the way that streaming has redefined the industry for good and for bad. I think for some artists it's incredible, for others it's hard. That's the way of the world to a degree, but that's definitely taken some adjustment. I think social media as well, everyone talks about social media, but some artists really just aren't built to be on social media. They're artists, and I think it's hard. I really feel for the acts that, they're private, shy people and they make brilliant music. If Radiohead started as a band now, they would be forced to do all sorts of stuff on social media, which isn't in their, character. And I think that there are probably artists that don't get their break that they deserve because they can't engage in the world of promotion as it is now. And I think that's a shame. I think there's probably great artists that, we don't hear about because they're not dancing around on TikTok. So I think that's really difficult. And I think the other thing is just how the label and landscape has changed. The big record labels don't want to sign as many new bands or artists. They're spending all their money on catalog because they can earn money for free. And the artist development side of the labels is shrinking. And so what that means is there's less staff, there's less investment. And as managers, we have to do more of the work. We have to do twice or three times as much work now as we did when I started. It's crazy. And so the management companies have to staff up. If you're individual, it's hard. It's a hard thing. But the good thing is that you have more control and you're at the center of the artist's universe. And I think that 15 years ago, that wasn't the case. The labels had more control and they felt like they were at the center. But now as managers, we can be empowered and be at the center of the artist world more.
And also in terms of artist development, as you mentioned, now we have to take into account a lot of partners, a lot of deals, a lot of, things that we have to take into account, as you said. And if you have a big agency as yours, it's okay. You have a lot of staff dealing with that. But for individuals, as you just rightly said, which kind of deals, which kind of things we should concentrate at ourselves as managers, just because are the key of everything. Is the distribution contract? Because streaming is so important? Is just booking? How do you feel about that?
I think, you know, I'm often torn between this, but the way that I see it is it's about the team and it's about the people. And it's better to sign with a company that you know is like, for example, with a record deal, if you sign with a company that is stable, where there's loyalty in the staff are going to stay the same, and where the staff is good. And really, like, it's a people business. And if you sign an amazing deal with a company that has kind of bad staff, it doesn't matter about the deal or the money, you're going to have a bad time. And I think that we work in a people business. It's an emotional product that we release, and the people we work with defines the success. I think that's generally my view now.
And talking about emotions, we are in the middle of everything, I guess. Sometimes we are this kind of facilitator. So there are a lot of conflicts, or could be maybe some conflicts. How do you deal with these conflicts? And in terms that you are not so affected by them, so you are not just die in trying to or solve the problem, or just being a little bit apart from the problem. So how do you deal with conflicts, or dealing with
Um,
egos,
it's
self-esteems?
it's a learning process, you
Yeah.
know, and I'm still learning, and I'm still, you know, humanity is a wondrous oddity, and you come across some crazy people in the music business for sure. But I think that you know, generally speaking, problems can be solved, and more often than not, problems can lead to opportunities. And I think that trying to just be calm, I always, you know, treat people well. I try and always play things, as we say in English, like straight bat, like trying to be really honest and clear and fair. And sometimes if that means you lose in the short term, it normally means you win in the long term. And I think in conflict resolution, you know, people get stressed out and heated. And I think just trying to reason and not get too emotional and not get too heated. I don't know. It's everyone has a different style. You know, I've had my times of being, you know, super stressed out, pulling my hair out, wondering what to do. You know, having conflicts with artists or with other team members. I think you have to always be professional. You know, we work in a professional industry, and I think that everyone's going through their own struggles and their own thing. Everyone's under pressure. Everyone's under even more pressure. You know, the music industry is under pressure, and I think, you know, always keeping that in mind and trying to find a positive resolution, and treating people fairly is what I try to do my best.
Okay, good. So and now let's talk about the present. So I would like to know what happens in Mexico some weeks ago. Um, I think I'm talking. I'm from Spain, so the generally speaking, for our artists are speaking Spanish speaking, or singing in Spanish, the natural way to go abroad is Latin America, is all other Spanish speaking countries. But in Europe, I think that is, and it's very difficult for us to go to Europe, for example. But in Europe, it's the other way around. So I guess it's difficult, a little bit difficult to go to Latin America. But you did it with the Hives. It's incredible. Some years ago, you are starting to do that. And well, as I say, I saw that I was in a theater, the Metropolitan Theater in Mexico City. It's a special venue. You just
Mhm.
all the Hives just well, it was a tremendous gig there. So I guess this is a very hard work that you were just it comes from some years ago. So when do you realize, what was the sign that tell you that you have to do that, that let's go there, let's do it, because there are some when do you do the move there?
I remember the moment exactly. It was actually the day after I signed the deal with the band. We were in LA, and it took a long time to sign our management agreement. With the Hives, they can be quite slow with deals. And we were in LA, and the next day they were playing in Guadalajara in Mexico. And I thought, well, I'm up for an adventure. I'll go to Guadalajara. I've never been to Mexico. Let's go. And so we flew to Guadalajara, and the Hives were headlining Corona Capital Festival, which is the big festival in Guadalajara. And I remember thinking that there was something was up when we went through passport control in Guadalajara airport, and the whole band were asked for their autographs by all of the police. And I remember thinking, I think these guys might be famous in Mexico. I don't know, but I've never seen that before. And it's a big airport, and all the customs people wanted photos with the band, and I thought this is interesting. And then we went to the show, and the band headlined. They played at midnight, and they had 50,000 people there. And then all of a sudden, the lead singer Pele starts speaking fluent Spanish on stage. I had no idea he spoke Spanish. He hadn't told me in his own Swedish way. The Swedes, sometimes they keep information to themselves. And he starts speaking Spanish, and he does the whole show in Spanish, telling all the jokes and everything. And the place went completely insane. And I remember texting my boss at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, we need to go back to Mexico. Like, this is crazy. And that was the start. And we put a lot of time and effort into South America. We hired our own PR agency to work on the management side. So we have a PR team across the whole continent and across in Brazil too. We have our own essentially extensions of management in Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, Chile, Brazil. We even have someone in Venezuela. We actually took the band to Venezuela 3 years ago. They were the first international band to play in Caracas for 10 years. And so we really doubled down, and we lent into the market, and we just got off a big tour with My Chemical Romance, doing stadiums across the whole continent. And we got 100,000 email addresses from the tour, 100,000 new Instagram fans. The band will go back to South America in a couple of years and do arenas, where 4 years ago they would do 1,000 to 2,000 tickets. We're going to do 15,000 to 20,000 the next time they come back. And we identified a market that has a lot of growth potential, a market that really responds when the artists see them. Like, I think, you get a lot of international bands and singers that go through that don't even try to speak Spanish or Portuguese, and it's fine. But when you do lean into the culture, when you do lean into the language, the response is significant. And so as a result of that, it's become arguably our biggest market worldwide. And it's a market that the band will sustain for the next 10 years. And apart from the numbers and the growth, it's an incredible place. The countries are incredible. The cities are incredible. The crowds are the best crowds in the world. There's no comparison. It's the best audience in the world. And, I think that we saw an opportunity, and we went for it, basically. And yeah, there's no looking back.
Yeah. Okay. So, and talking about the metrics, you talk about followers, fans. Right now, we are a little bit crazy about that, about followers and so forth. But is there any other signals that you look into when you are looking for progress, or how you measure that? Well, this artist development material that you are investing in are really progressing, are having some results, apart from, I say, metrics or data or usual normal numbers.
It's a hard one. That's generally the number that we use, but at the same time, you have to go with your gut. I was on that whole tour with the band, and I could see the differences in each show. Some shows were incredible, dynamite, like had goosebumps, watching the show. Others were amazing, but maybe not quite as energetic. Like, for example, in Lima, which was the first show on the tour, it was one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life that the Hives played. And my gut feeling from that was, I think we can go in and we can do 20,000 tickets in Lima the next time. Sometimes you have to be there and you have to see it and feel the reaction. And I think, yeah, I guess it's one of those things, you have to be there to see it. And when the band is on tour, the tour manager can say, oh yeah, it was a great show, but sometimes you don't get all of the feeling. You don't get that sense that everyone in the crowd was, super engaged. It's a hard one, but I think that being at the big shows is super important. You can see with your own eyes how it is. But then that is not sustainable. And as a manager, you can't go to all the shows. So, it's tricky.
And also, I think I don't remember well how you call it, but it's like underline shows or some kind of shows
Underplay. Was
under.
it underplay shows?
Exactly. So because you think that yes, is also a good well, I don't know, a tool to just
Yeah.
reward super fans or people that are really followers of the band, or yeah, I think.
Yeah, so when we started managing the Hives, they hadn't done hard ticket shows really for like 10 years. They'd spent 10 years playing some headline shows, but mostly festivals. And so we needed to make them hot again. We needed to make them a really hot ticket. And so when we started the campaign, the whole launch was just underplay shows that we made red hot, sold out straight away. You had to sign up to the mailing list to get access to the show. A lot of artists do this, but it definitely made the fans go, and the old fans, go, oh my God, the Hives are hot again. Because I think the fans, there were a lot of fans of the Hives that had felt that they had gone downhill a bit, which is true, they had. And it's good to make the original fans feel like they want to support again. I think some fans get sad when their favorite band isn't doing so well, and then they kind of check out. And making shows hot and sell out really quick, it sends a message to the industry, and then people start to talk about the hype, and it can be a really, really good drive for demand, and the festivals get all excited, and the press wants to talk about it. So it's good, but it's hard financially for sure. And like when you have a band like the Hives who have that it costs money for them to tour, and you do underplay shows, it's difficult, and so you have to think about how you're investing the money, and it gets intense. But I think it's worth it, and it's probably it's one of the best things to do to drive hype. I think selling out underplays.
And coming back to the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that today is very difficult to be an AR, so looking for new artists. But if you already started today with a new already an artist, what are the first things you would do in this the first month or in the two first months that you are working with this new artist or band? How do you
Well,
plan?
it's funny. We talked about this in the office recently, and this applies to big artists too. I think it's good to identify the vision. You can say, "Oh, I'll do this for your career," but I think it's good to sit with the artist and to really identify what is their vision. Maybe what is their vision statement. You can write down what are their ideals, their aims, what are their values, what are their guiding principles. This kind of stuff can help when you're making decisions, especially when you're making hard decisions. Sometimes referring back to the original kind of guiding principles can really help, because sometimes it gets crazy. There's so many decisions to make, and it can be hard to decide what to do. And if you're not careful, you can end up veering away from the original vision and the plan. I think that's a really important thing to do, and it's really helpful for the artists also, because sometimes the artists, they need to sit and they need to say it. Otherwise, as a manager, you're just going off of what you think. So I think it's really important to do that. I think that you know, having artists really dig into the music and think about who they're going to make the music with and that kind of thing, it takes time, and you need to try with different people. I think that the A&R thing, it's expensive too, so sometimes finding a producer who really loves the artist and can come on board early and be cheap, not charge you all full rate, all that kind of stuff. That can be super helpful in the early days to help build the artist's music. That's something we also look for, is to find a creative collaborator to help them in the recording. I mean, I think also it depends on what stage the artists are, but with new artists, getting them to play shows, like sometimes you discover an artist and they've played 5 shows, and it's like, I mean, we've even done it before where we've had bands create a fake name and then we book them gigs so that they can play under a fake name so that no one knows who they are. So that by the time we do a show and invite the industry down, they're good. And this is a problem that happens now, is that an artist could make a demo in their bedroom and it blows up. And then all of a sudden they announce their first show and they suck. And then the industry is like, oh, this band sucks. And it's really hard to come back from that. And that is one of the things I think is really, you have to be careful about right now, is making sure you don't expose the artists too early. It's hard. It's a hard problem to solve, but.
But now, Michelle, I don't know, I not have the chat open, but maybe I think it's moving the chat a lot.
I did see one question that I thought was a really good one, which is about managers having rights.
Yeah, it's what's your take on managers having rights to the music, say 5% or similar?
I think 100% managers should talk about having rights, and I think it's a really big issue, and the industry needs to address it. If we worked in tech, we are the CEOs of an artist business. If we worked in tech, we would get shares in the product. In the music industry, as managers, we get a share of revenue up until a certain point, but we can get fired. And that's one of the tricky things, is you can put a lot of work in and then you can get fired. And I think that especially with the increased workload that managers have to do, the marketing, the A&R, like there's so much more that we have to do. I think that, it's a good argument. And my feeling is that in the next couple of years, we might start to see more of that happening. I think that when managers invest money into the artists as well, that increases the case. If you put up capital, you should get some sort of share of long-term revenue. But I think, a cut of the royalties, I don't think it should be a taboo subject. I think it should be discussed. And I also think that, one of the other big discussion points we're having is with label services deals and advances. So to be honest, like for me, I think advances, for like personal advances, it's like taking a bad bank loan. You'll get the money cheaper from a bank if you want 200 grand or something for a living expenses. Marketing advances is different. The labels, the distribution companies like AWOL and so on, they'll give you an advance for marketing. But I think the managers should commission on that, because we're the ones that are running and managing that money. So that's something that we're talking about now. I think that, if you get a marketing advance from a label, the managers should have a cut of that, because you're not going to get any commission from royalties for a certain amount of time. So I think if anyone's doing label services deals, you should push to get a cut of the marketing advance, because you shouldn't work for free. So that's just something I feel pretty strongly about, because I've done many deals like that over the years, and it's been a struggle to get revenue from those sources. So I think we should all be pushing for that. You should value your work.
We have another question from Tessie. What about the different challenge to manage a band compared to a solo artist as you work with both?
Hmm. I don't really work with solo artists personally. I haven't really done that. I've always been a band guy. Um, I think, there are different challenges when you manage a band. Sometimes it can be, you know, you've got a bunch of different people to manage and relationships, and um, on the one hand it's like a team, on the other hand people can have different ideas of their vision, and so you have to constantly be, figuring that out. Sometimes with some bands there's like a leader in the band, and that can make things easier but also harder, because then the other band members can get resentful. It's just people. I think with solo artists, you might have the one person, but that person might not have that strong of a vision. They might have a really strong vision, and that's fine. But there's also cases where a solo artist doesn't. They're just a great singer and they've got a great personality, but actually, who they are as an artist, they need help. And so then, you have to start either yourself doing A&R work, or bringing in an A&R person or a creative director or whatever, and bolting on, and that's expensive too. And then, you have an obligation to pay for a band. A touring's expensive because you're having to pay salaries for band members. That is a killer. When I've had it before with rock bands who then have session players, and so you have two or even three more people you're having to pay a day rate to, and it gets really expensive, and it's really hard to make the touring work. um, it's different, a lot of different problems, different upsides, downsides. But yeah, like I said, I haven't worked with solo artists before, so I'm not super experienced in that.
Thank you. We have another question. How many artists can you manage at the same time? Is there communication, cooperation, or competition between them?
Everything. I think as a frontline manager, I'd probably say, well, maybe it depends on the solo artist and the band thing. If you're managing five bands, let's say each band has five band members, that's a lot of people you've got to be checking in on all the time. And I think that can get just the personnel management on that can get tough. Plus that all the different teams, and for a band like the Hives, we've got a team of 200 people roughly worldwide. And most of those people I speak to on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, having 1,000 people that you're having to communicate with, or remember their names, or remember what they do, or remember who's good, who's not, all that stuff. I think it's a lot. Um, a solo artist deal is maybe different because you've got less personalities to manage. I think, four bands would it's hard, but also some managers are quite clever with how they structure the cycles. Like, they'll have one band releasing an album in full album cycle, while one of the other bands is writing, recording, or taking time off, and then they swap. So they're not constantly having the artists on all the time. And you see that with some of the really smart managers, where they manage to have the artists on and off cycle at the right times. And it's smart, but it's not always possible.
Thank you. There is another one. Do you take 20% of the revenue, or do you have a different deal with your artists?
That's confidential. But that's a pretty standard rate. 20% of net. I think, in the UK, generally it's 20% of net profit. In the US, some people are on gross. That's, I think, been changed to sort of adjusted gross. So on live, there are some costs that come out before the manager takes their cut. I think that gross revenue for a manager is tough. Of course, we'd all like to make more money, but it has a risk at damaging your relationship with the artist. I think as a manager, you're so close to what the artist does. You're the closest person to them in their career, and being aligned with them financially is very valuable in keeping that relationship and the trust tight. If your artist doesn't sell as many tickets on a tour, and then all of a sudden you're making loads of money because you're on the gross, your relationship with your artist is going to get screwed up, no doubt about it. If your tour doesn't do so well and then you don't make so much money as a manager, at least you're aligned. And so when you're making decisions about finances, you are aligned with your artist. And so I think that the 20% of net thing, is the net commission thing is beneficial for everyone. Um, there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's people who work in like the Latin industry who or hip hop who kind of they go in as business partners, so they're 50-50, but maybe they put up money. If you put up a bunch of investment, then you could probably have a discussion about increasing your split. But generally 20% net is what we see in the UK.
Thank you. There's another one. How would you prepare your artists for showcases like South by Southwest or Eurosonic? How much do you feel the success in networking, having a guy versus good music?
I think South by Southwest has probably lost some of its value. It depends what you're trying to do. I remember going to South by Southwest when artists were still getting signed at South by Southwest. I actually still remember seeing Haim, I think it was, play a showcase, and there were guys with record deals printed on paper who are trying to like give them to the band after the show. I mean, it felt like it was so old school. Now, generally, if you play South by Southwest, you've already got a manager, you've already got an agent, and you're probably signed. Sometimes South by is good for generating interest in the US. If you say, you're an English band or singer and you've got a label, maybe you need a US label, maybe you need a US agent. You could do South by and create a bit of buzz and maybe get some radio people on board, that kind of thing. But I don't think it's super useful anymore for being signed. Some of the showcase stuff in Europe is still really good, like Eurosonic. Great Escape is really good. I think, especially for live, like for promoters. If you're a hot band from the UK and you go and play Eurosonic, you can end up with a summer full of festivals from one great show. If you've got your agent there, and I've seen it happen firsthand. Where you play a good showcase and all of a sudden all the festival promoters want you. So that's pretty useful, and I think that the how do you prepare an artist for that? I hope they're good. Play a good show. It's hard to know. I think there's you can be strategic on the slot that you get. Like try not to get a slot that's too late because then everyone's too drunk. Or not. Don't get a slot on the last day when everyone's tired and wants to go home. Little things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think they're useful. South by, I question the merits because it's so expensive for international bands to go and play.
Thank you. We have another question. How do you manage communication with your acts? Is it different for each? Do you try to host a regular meeting session or ad hoc as things come up? And do you use any tools like share notes, private message tools, etc.?
It's like every artist is different. It's an ongoing struggle. I think WhatsApp is absolutely awful, but useful at the same time, but becomes a real struggle. And I think for the managers, especially, I have 2 clients where each client has 10 WhatsApp groups. And in some of those WhatsApp groups, I'm getting 200 or 300 messages a day, and it becomes extremely stressful. So I think, you've got to figure out what works for everyone. I try and keep as much as I can on email, like getting an approval on something. I'm going to send it on email and I want the band to reply on the email. So I have it in writing. Sometimes on WhatsApp stuff gets missed and one band member doesn't reply, but you didn't see it. And then that band member is like, well, I didn't see this. I didn't approve it. And I think, trying to be on top of that sort of stuff is important. I I sometimes use Excel spreadsheets for to-do lists. Some artists prefer to use notes on the iPhone. Some prefer Google. You're having to always adapt. Sometimes the artist will change their mind halfway through a campaign about how they want the information. But what I do think is super important is FaceTime and calls and meetings. I'm really trying to, if like with the Hives, they live in Sweden and they all live in different parts of Sweden. So it's very rare that we all come together. Sometimes I will fly to Stockholm in the morning. I'll take a 7 a.m. flight and I'll have a 3 hour meeting with the band and then I'll fly home that night on Ryanair. I won't even stay the night and I'll get more done in that 3 hours than in weeks, So I think it really depends on how the artists work. But I think that, WhatsApp we discuss it in the office all the time. WhatsApp is a killer, and it burns people out. So I think trying to be strict with the artists too and say, look, I'm a human being as well. Like this is an important thing. Boundaries as managers. The artists they can text you and call you on the weekends all the time, but we're also humans, and I think you should, you know, try and structure what you're doing so you're not getting burnt out. And if you are, communicate that to the artists because it's in their interest too.
Thank you. We have another question. Can you describe your main function as an artist manager now? What do you do personally? What do you delegate?
I mean, it really changes. Right now I'm dealing with financial analysis from last year. I'm uh, finalizing touring for 2027. Some days I'm reviewing video treatments. Some days I'm hiring social media people. I mean, I think it really depends. I try and delegate as much as I can to some of my team members. I have a day-to-day manager and I have a head of marketing. But it really depends. Sometimes they're busy. They have other projects too, and so you have to adapt. Um, you have to be adaptable. But I definitely don't mind getting my hands dirty and getting into the detail on stuff, even though that's one of the hard things about management now is that there is so much detail and there's so much volume. So yeah, it depends. It's a case by case thing. I think you're muted.
Sorry. How involved in the creative process are you? Do you listen to demos, come with suggestions for songs, etc., or are you strictly business?
No, I think there there are some managers who are strictly business. I think there's some who are way more A&R. It depends on what the artist wants and what the artist needs. I think uh, ultimately I love music, so I want to talk about the music, and that's not too crazy a thing to say. I think that with bands and their process, sometimes it's best to kind of let them get on with it and not get too involved. You don't want to meddle too much. um I've there have been times where I've kind of put my oar in a bit too much and it's often backfired. And so yeah, I've learned, it's a learning curve over the years for sure. uh but I don't think you should ever be shy about saying that you don't like something or that you do like something. And I think the artists, sometimes artists want to hear, sometimes they might not say that they want to hear your input, but deep down they do. And they, it's good to give validation and to get people excited about the music too. Like, you get some artists who are really shy and don't know if their music's good or not. You should give them support and be really positive about it. I think it really depends. But I'd say I probably sit in the middle of it.
And what is your favorite part?
Ah. Um, that's a hard question. I think the strategy and the live side of things is probably where I have the most fun in building the live trajectory and planning the touring and the production and thinking about the long term side of things. It's funny, like when I first started, I couldn't imagine booking things, a year from now. Like, when I first started in management, I was thinking 3 months, 4 months ahead, but now I'm thinking 5 years, 7 years ahead. And I like that kind of, coming up with a really big goal. Like, okay, we want to sell out an arena. And then how do you do that? And that's the stuff that I really enjoy, is like coming up with a really big aim and putting it in the flag, putting a flag in the sand, and then thinking, okay, how do we get there, and how do we fulfill the steps to get there? And I think that's probably what I enjoy the most, just the strategy side of things, and also the business. Like I find the business side, all the multifaceted areas of income and the dynamic nature of the music business. I find that really, really exciting. There is creativity in the business side as well as in the creative, of course.
Of course. I have another question. When you look at the Hives career today, what are you most proud of strategically, not artistically, but from a management perspective?
I think we kind of made them a hot band again. We were able to harness their creativity and their humor in a way that actually worked really well in the digital age. They've got a big social media following now, and they play arenas, and they're a big band now, and I think that being able to give them a comeback, and also just as people, give them the confidence to do it, and I think that's I've had a lot of joy in that, in being on that journey with them, and getting them to the place that they deserve to be, in a time that's hard for bands like them. It's not easy for rock bands from the 2000s right now. It's not. It's a hard climate, and we've been able to rejuvenate their career, and I'm really proud of them.
And what's next in Latin America for them?
We are going to Mexico again in about 6 weeks. We're playing a festival in a place called Querétaro, headlining festival. It's their first major festival headline, in the market, and so we're going to do that, and then we'll see. We probably will not go back for a little while. I think that the band have been to Latin America a bunch of times in the last 3 years. I think there's so many artists going there right now that you have to be really careful not to overplay. I think that the audiences are very eager and excited, but the tickets are expensive and the economies there are tricky. And I think that you can go back too many times and then you can have a bad tour. Like you have to be really careful about going back too many times. So I think we're gonna hold off for a minute, and let the demand come back. I think that scarcity in touring is really important right now, especially with the cost of living crisis. I think you have to be really careful about over touring. People don't have as much money to spend on concert tickets, and I think if you try and play too many times, you could end up not selling your shows out and stuff. So that's something we talk about a lot in the office now.
Well, unfortunately, Matt, we are running out of time, not of questions, but of time. But
No worries.
could you be so kind to finish giving us, or most precisely to the younger managers or the managers that are starting right now, could you give us just 2, 3 tips that we should take into account when just not to giving up so early in our career, just giving on, so being inspirational to us, please?
No, I think like, don't be afraid to fail. Actually, failing can be one of the best things that happens because you learn lessons from it. It can be painful in the short term, but you have to be brave as managers. So, taking risks, most of the time it works out. It does. That thing that you're scared to do, or that deal, or that phone call you're scared to make, more often than not, it works out in the way that you want it to. I think like always being curious, and not close my, just always scanning for opportunities and being curious, and always take the meeting, always take the phone call. Relationships are so important in this business now, that more than ever, especially as things are so digital and faceless in a way. Having those face-to-face relationships with people is super, super important. um, and I think, like, it is that thing of treating people well, because you never know where people will be in 5-10 years. Like, and it's so funny, it's a small industry, and there are some people who I ran into 15 years ago who are now doing things at YouTube or labels or whatever, and it's funny, we've all been on this journey together. And actually, I think it's great to see everyone's path, and not everything is linear, and not every it's not always a straight path. And I think you should always be open to opportunities that maybe fall outside of your comfort zone. Like for me, I never thought I'd do work in Latin America 3-4 years ago. It wasn't even something that I considered, and now it's something that I do a lot of, and I kind of opened myself up to the opportunity. And yeah, I think just being open and curious and positive.
Bravo, Matt. Thank you so much. And well, for me, it was really, really inspiring. So thank you so much for your talks and your experience. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Matt. I know you have a hard stop at 6 p.m., but thank you so much for for your time and responding our questions. And thank you, everyone. I will see you in the next event. Just make sure to subscribe to our newsletter and see you then.
Great. That was
Thank
fun.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you.